Hi, everybody. I hope that you're enjoying your food and that it's settling in. We're going to get started with our lunchtime program. It's time to hear an amazing story. A story of a city transformed from grit to green. The story of the creation of one of the most livable cities on the planet. All of this done under the leadership of the great mayor, Mayor Richard M. Daley. To tell us this story, we're joined by John Sievertson, who is the leading voice for design in Chicago. A leading voice, sorry. That would be an awesome job, the leading voice. He is senior principal at Canon Design, a member of the Chicago Design Initiative, and a board member for the IIT School of Architecture, ArchiWorks, and the Chicago Architectural Foundation, where he is past chair. John is also on the executive committee and member of the board of the American Architectural Foundation. Previously, John has served as the president of the Graham Foundation, the chair of the Urban Design Task Force. You might actually be the voice of the urban design. The chair of the Urban Design Task Force for the Chicago Central Area Action Plan. John will be joined by three hometown experts on the subject of Chicago's design accomplishments: Lee Bay, Gerald Edelman, and Barbara Gaines. John?
Thank you, Jason. To those of you who are the real voices, I appreciate what Jason said, but I would like to add my welcome to all of you to Chicago, to this really remarkable conference, and especially thank our local Chicago folks at the Driehaus Foundation for offering their support, obviously along with Target and CERDNA, our other great funders. And thanks to the NEA, to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and AAF for doing a great job organizing this event. So I think a great city is a place where social, cultural, environmental, historical, and economic contexts are woven into a rich fabric. And it's a fabric then that enriches, it's a fabric that inspires. And a fabric, I think, most importantly, that fosters the improvement of all people's lives. And of course, I think Chicago is a great city, and today we are going to hear three remarkable leaders share their stories about how our cultural institutions and our built and natural environments have dynamically evolved under Mayor Daley's leadership. From post-industrial to global, whether in the central area or in the neighborhoods, our culture has, to use Barbara's expression from a conversation recently, drastically changed for the better. And I think an important thing to say today is that while in some respects we are looking back over the great things that have occurred in our city, we are on a trajectory which will carry us, I hope, well into the future to the time when there is a 50th anniversary of this group. Before I introduce our speakers, here's what we're going to do. Each of them will make roughly a 10 to 12 minute presentation, which will inspire you and maybe make you cry. Then, this is the challenging part, and this is where you come in. We will then have a question and answer period. Does everybody know what that is? So this is going to be a special one, though, because again, this is Barbara's instruction. We expect this to be a dynamic exchange. Okay, so that means you have to ask energetic and smart and challenging questions. You will not be graded. You should feel free. This is being recorded, though, isn't it? Okay, so please, please, please ask questions and think hard about what questions you'd like to ask. So now I'd like to introduce all three speakers. Lee Bay will be our first speaker. Lee Bay, good friend, is executive director of the Chicago Central Area Committee, which is, I think all of us know, an influential civic group comprised of business and cultural leaders devoted to improving the architecture, transportation, cultural life, and urban design of downtown Chicago. Bay is also a writer, an advisor, a professor, and critic, specializing in architecture, urbanism, and the role politics plays in the creation of the built environment. He's also a former deputy chief of staff to Mayor Richard Daley, where he has done all kinds of great things as well. Our second speaker will be Jerry Edelman, and Jerry is the president and CEO of Open Lands, one of the first metropolitan conservation organizations in the nation. It was founded in 1963, and Open Lands works to protect and enhance open space in northeastern Illinois and the surrounding region. Edelman chairs Mayor Daley's Nature and Wildlife Committee and serves on numerous boards and commissions, and has worked on sustainable development in Yunnan, China since the early 1990s. And our third speaker will be Barbara Gaines. And Barbara Gaines, Artistic Director, is the founder of the Chicago Shakespeare Theater on Navy Pier, an institution that we are all very, very proud of, which in fact celebrates its 25th anniversary season this year. Barbara has directed more than 30 of Shakespeare's plays and made her lyric opera debut this season, directing Giuseppe Verdi's Macbeth. Among her many honors are the 2008 Tony Award for Outstanding Regional Theater, multiple Joseph Jefferson Awards for Best Production and for Best Director, and in 2005, Barbara was awarded the very prestigious honorary OBE, which is the Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, in recognition for her contributions strengthening British-American cultural relations. Ms. Gaines serves on the Shakespearean Council of the Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London and is a life trustee of Northwestern University and has served on panels for the National Endowment for the Arts. So let's welcome all three of these speakers. And now a standing ovation for Lee Bay.
Thank you. And again, welcome to Chicago. I want to go back a little bit in time. I'm going to go back for a bit to 1989. That's when Richard M. Daley was first elected mayor. And I ran across a photograph of myself from then. And I had hair, which is startling enough, and was very young. What happened over the next 22 years, I would lose my hair, of course, but the city would experience impressive growth. And Daley, the magic of it was that, of course, the country experienced impressive growth during that time. The thing that made it magic in Chicago was that Daley was able to wield his power in a way that allowed the growth to take shape in interesting ways to really transform the city. He preserved buildings, landmark buildings. He presided over the expansion and the salvation of downtown. Downtown in 1989, and I was a student here at Columbia College, right close by here. And the South Loop, the area where you are now, it was largely panhandlers and students like me begging each other for the same dime back and forth. Some of that still goes on, but there's other things happening now as well. And he began to rebuild neighborhoods as well. Streets were paved, sidewalks were laid, development came to the neighborhoods. The magic of it is that Mayor Daley understood what most of you mayors understand as well, which is that when it comes down to it, the mayor is really the chief planning officer of his town, of his city, that the buck stops there with planning issues, that indeed the mayor is the chief urban planner. And with that, of course, he became a national leader. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you photographs, sort of a then and now story of Chicago and its transformation. And it's already here, it's behind me. And I call this Daily Chicago, Transformation and Change. So many of these photographs, and there's a great book if you're in town that I really want you guys to pick. It's called Chicago from the Sky. It's by an architect and planner here, Larry Okrent. It's a new book that just came out. And Larry is a photographer also, and he photographed much of the city in the same 20-year span that we're talking about. So I took the liberty, he's a good friend, to borrow some of his photographs for this presentation. Now, what you're sort of hovering above the main branch of the Chicago River in this photograph, which is at the bottom of the screen, and you're looking north. You can see the John Hancock Building, the dark tower at the top. This is what Streeterville and Michigan Avenue looked like in the late 1980s, right around the time that Mayor Daley took office. Now, there's a lot of stuff happening here. I mean, there's hotels, there's a water tower, the shopping center, and there's growth here, and many cities would be happy to have this. Look at how this area changed over the next 20 years. It's astounding. It becomes denser, taller. At the bottom of the screen there, you can see Trump. I don't have a thing, but at the bottom of the screen near the river, you can see the beginnings of Trump Tower just sort of being built there. But what you see is that ocean of emptiness away from Michigan Avenue, parking lots and smaller structures, really becomes something completely different. Let's go a little further. This is Block 37, which is, for years was a sort of a taunt and a byword for failed city planning. This is a block right across the street from Macy's. I still call it Marshall Fields, I'm sorry, and next to the Daley Center, bounded roughly by Washington, Randolph, State Street to your right, and Dearborn to your left that was demolished and torn down previous to the mayor taking office and sat vacant for years. Today, it is this, a mixed-use facility. The beauty of this project, I think, and this happened after my time in the mayor's office, so I can't take any credit for this, is that what was understood here is that the grand project, waiting for the big giant project that was going to save the North Loop and save all of downtown, that's not what was needed. It was needed here, but it wasn't needed here. What needed to be done here was an insertion that just worked. And though there's all sorts of, I think, a backstory about the ownership of this now, but what's happened here is that there's a viable retail space here when there was nothing before. To go on, this is the Sun-Times building, my old stomping ground. I'm a former architecture critic for the Sun-Times. Actually, this is 1998. These are my two daughters actually running down the thing there, and I can't catch them even then. And this is what it looks like now, with Trump Tower on the site. The riverfront, and this picture doesn't quite do it justice, the riverfront is just as accessible visually here than it is here, but clearly there's an improvement. And of course, a signature tower to Chicago's skyline as well. The good things that happened downtown spread out to the neighborhoods. One of the things that was fascinating to me as critic and as later on an employee for the mayor was that the mayor had a thing in which that the administration would reach out into neighborhoods and save the gem of the neighborhood with the idea that around that, good things would happen. This is the Garfield Park Conservatory on the west side of Chicago, not far from where the Martin Luther King riots were about 30 years earlier than this, 40 years earlier than this photograph. The west side of Chicago was sort of notorious as being a place that you'd skip over if you could on your way to Oak Park. The administration had the courage to see that this conservatory was really a nation-class, if not world-class facility that deserved to be supported. And it put money and effort and good people around it, and the conservatory is an asset not just to the west side, but to the city as well. Another thing that gets overlooked a little bit is that away from downtown, the mayor had a campaign of building police stations and libraries, these buildings that touch every neighborhood. So old police stations like this one, the old Town Hall police station on Halsted Street, so old it's named Town Hall because that's what it once was, gets replaced, this is another police station, by this very modern, very open police station that has community rooms, and it sends a different message about policing to it. This is a fortress, as pretty as it may be on the outside, but this is really a place that welcomes. And there are libraries and other things as well, the inside where the cops can do their thing and have room and peace. This is another project that I worked on. Dirk Lohan is also responsible for this, who's here today. This is Soldier Field in the museum campus in about 1990. And you can see Soldier Field, the stadium there at the bottom. And you can see, if you look to the left and right of it, that it's flanked by Lakeshore Drive, which splits this sort of assembly of buildings in the middle and separates the museums from each other. The Adler Planetarium stuck way out there on the lake, the Shedd Aquarium, and the Field Museum just in front of Soldier Field. What happened is this, where Lakeshore Drive was moved over and created the museum campus, nationally known. The three campuses of the museums are all able to be walked together, easily accessible. And Soldier Field, which was sort of falling into the lake at the time, gets new green space around it in a controversial project, but I think that one that showed that Chicago was ready for forward-looking architecture as well, breathes new life into the stadium for another 40 or 50 years, and it creates green space along the way. This is the Robert Taylor Homes and Stateway Gardens, a long 2-mile corridor of high-rise public housing built in Chicago in the 50s and 60s. That is largely gone now. Replacement housing has come, slow, but it's coming. And it becomes the next mayor's, the current mayor's, the new mayor's responsibility to figure this out. But he figures it out with a plate that's a lot cleaner and a lot easier to deal with than before. As we get to the end, there's one thing I wanted to show. This might be a little bit hard to make out, but you're kind of above Millennium Park there. You're above the lake. Lakeshore Drive is curving around your right there. And you see there's a void sort of in the middle. The main branch of the Chicago River is a sort of the cut that you see toward the middle of the photograph going from left to right. This is it in 1988, just before the mayor took office. This comes courtesy of historicareals.com, which is the most addictive website in the world. And here's what this looks like as of yesterday, or at least the Google map that I stole yesterday, where you see Millennium Park. Let me go back just a second here, where I wish this thing had does it have a, let's see if it has a pointer on it. I'm going to point you in the eye, right? All right, if you'll indulge me for 1 second. Here is where Millennium Park is going to be, if you can see that. Above this sort of void of buildings, this is where Lakeshore East, a high-rise development, is going to be. Across the river is City Front Center. It's going to be there in a little while, too. And as we go forward 10 years, 20 years, sorry, we see an area transformed, an area reborn. This happened under Daley's watch. So as we get to the end, we tell a story that is one that's complementary to not only this mayor, but also to the city itself. A story that tells what happens when a person has a vision and can move a city forward and can wield the power that mayors have to coalesce, to make coalitions, to get people together, to pass laws, to adjust zoning, to put together packages, to do whatever is possible to move a city forward. And that, I think, is the mayor's legacy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jerry Edelman, president of Open Lands. And as John said, in his opening remarks, that during the past 22 years, we've seen an amazing transformation of a post-industrial city to a world-class, great global city. And it's come under the vision and leadership of Mayor Daley, that transformation. And there are a lot of things that go into a vibrant global city. Clearly, you need a strong economy, you need diverse and affordable housing, rich cultural amenities, efficient transportation systems, quality educational opportunities, and so forth. But one of those ingredients that's been a signature, a brand really, of the Daley administration is that this is a sustainable green city that offers, rich nature, recreation, natural beauty that can be enjoyed by everyone, by visitors, and certainly by residents. And in Chicago, our motto is Urbs and Horto. Well, city in a garden, Mayor Daley clearly has given that new life. And, if imitation is one of the greatest forms of flattery, what has happened, the eyes of the nation and to some extent the world have been on Chicago to see what's going on here. The kind of innovation and creativity that the mayor has brought has been really extraordinary. He's been an ambassador for green, sustainable cities, certainly throughout this nation and to a large extent the world. At Open Lands, we've been honored to be a partner with the mayor in many of these things. We're a regional land conservation group, as was mentioned. We were formed in 1963 at a time when conservation was seen as sort of rural areas or wilderness, not big cities, suburbs, ex-urban fringe. We work in a 3-state metro area, this kind of southern shore of Lake Michigan. But at the heart of this region is this great city. And we've always had a very focused program. And one of the areas that we've focused on is urban forestry. We did a policy kind of analysis before Mayor Daley took office and had documented that there was a net loss of 100,000 trees over a 10-year period. The city and park district, the two agencies responsible for tree planting and maintenance, were not planting any new trees. They were cutting down not only diseased trees and dead trees, but live and healthy ones. You call up your alderman and say, I don't like the leaves falling on my car, cut it down. There were no policies. The professional people that left, it was a disaster. Well, Mayor Daley takes office and he says, I'm going to plant 500,000 trees. And we kind of said, will he really? But we wanted to make sure that what happened in LA after the Olympics in '84, where they planted 1 million seedlings, very ambitious program, but many of them, more than half, died over the next couple of years because they had drought, nobody was watering, no one was taking care of them. So we formed a program called Tree Keepers, which is really a citizen forestry initiative. We now have over 1,300 graduates from all walks of life. We have work days, but more important, we have a core of people who understand the value of the urban forest and who have partnered closely with the city and the park district all these years maintaining that. In fact, it's become a model. We just got a call recently from Canberra, Australia. They're adapting our program there. And so it's been a really interesting experiment. But without the mayor's leadership and commitment, we never could have developed it. Recently, the mayor launched something called the City Trees Initiative, which is to really increase the health of the urban forest. He wants to plant more than 600,000 trees, wants to increase the tree canopy in the city from 11 to 17%. We have a way to go, but the mayor always focuses on action and results. And in 1998, for the first time really, the city of Chicago looked comprehensively at all of the open space and park opportunities in the city. The mayor convened a group of not-for-profits and city agencies that included, most importantly, the City of Chicago, the Chicago Park District, and the Cook County Forest Preserve, the three major public agencies that are responsible for developing and maintaining public open space here. And this comprehensive plan was developed. We think of the city as being so green, and depends on where you live. 2/3 of our neighborhoods were severely underserved in terms of park space, public open space. And under this program now, more than 700 gardens have been created throughout Chicago neighborhoods, including increasingly a number of gardens that are growing food. The plan at the time documented that we had 11,500 acres of park space. Today, under Mayor Daley's leadership, more than 1,500 acres have been added. That's a 13% increase. There's some very large landscape scale opportunities in the Lake Calumet area that are really significant. And one example of Open Lands Partnership is that we do something called neighborhood open space planning, go into a neighborhood that's underserved, serve as staff really to a broad cross-section. We've done that in about 7 neighborhoods, developing comprehensive plans, that include tot lots, community gardens, green of school campuses, and so forth. And we've worked with the city acquiring more than 20 new sites, throughout the city. The Chicago region, in spite of all our development and fragmented governance, is very rich in terms of biodiversity. We're on a major flyway. There's a broad coalition of public agencies, not-for-profits, and scientific institutions called Chicago Wilderness that works throughout the 3-state metro area, about 260 members. Mayor Daley said, we want to bring nature back to Chicago, too, and it's different kind of scale, different kinds of challenges. And so he formed a Nature and Wildlife Committee. I'm not aware of too many big cities that have them, but really focused on biodiversity, on habitat, on research, on understanding what it means to bring nature back into the city. I've been honored to chair that committee for the past several years. We developed a biodiversity recovery plan, if you want, the Park District strategy now is, it's more than grass and trees and ball fields, as important as they are, but it's also natural areas, woodlands, rich lagoon habitats where you can have great fishing, bird sanctuaries, where kids can actually camp overnight, places for reflection, a dimension to the life of this city and to the physical places that we all experience that really was not even talked about before Mayor Daley. The litany of his green innovation is long and very impressive, and let me just touch on a few things. Lee already did a bit. The Chicago River was our forgotten waterfront. Very few policies, no good programs, and under Mayor Daley, almost 6 miles of new public access have been added, more than 20 acres of riverfront setbacks and parks. We heard about the museum campus. The relocation of Lakeshore Drive, huge effort. And he recognized that this lakefront is our signature and that we have to do everything we can to both enhance and expand public access and the aesthetic and open space quality of it. Millennium Park, clearly a new world-class model for public open spaces and public art. What an amazing achievement. Northerly Island, the reclaiming of it. Mayor Daley said this was meant to be one of the islands of the Great Burnham Plan. We're bringing it back to that. And it was rather controversial, closing down an airport, but he did it. We have landscape medians now, 93 miles of them throughout the city. This is not just Michigan Avenue and the downtown. This is in neighborhoods throughout the city. Green roofs. There are 500 that are planned or built. We have more than any other city in the country. This happens to be Mayor Daley's own on City Hall. Half of that building is the City Hall, half is the county building. The county does not have a green roof. It has an asphalt or, tarred roof, and the differences in temperature dramatic, and so it's also become a bit of a pilot to document, what kind of climate impacts these have. And speaking of climate, we have a very powerful climate action plan that has brought together units of government, the not-for-profit community, business, industry, citizens, and I'd say it's one of the finest in the country. We still have a lot of work to do to implement it, but there's a vision, there's a blueprint, there's a framework for all of that. The mayor recognizes that we need to have healthy, locally grown food here where people live. We have food deserts, throughout the city and neighborhoods where people have to travel 5-6 miles or more to get to just a supermarket. And so urban agriculture has been one of his passions, and community gardens have been developed, urban farms. It's still in its infancy, but I would say again that Chicago has emerged as a real leader in this movement of food security, food systems. And the mayor also recognized that, Chicago's at the heart of the region, and there are many issues that are unique to the city, but we are so connected to the future and challenges of the entire region. And so he was the catalyst for bringing together all the mayors, all of you in our region, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. He then realized that, we're part also of a bigger region, which is the Great Lakes, and so he was the catalyst for creating the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. Always thinking bigger, saying, we may disagree on certain things, we'll compete, but there are so many shared challenges and opportunities, and if we're going to compete globally, we all have to work on that together. And, here's the motto on steroids, kind of. That's sort of what he's done in many ways. And, some people may say that, planting trees, building bike trails, having natural areas in our parks, that's frosting on the cake. It's desirable but not essential. Do it if you can afford it, basically. This is profoundly wrong thinking. These things the mayor has done for the environment are essential to a city's livability as emergency services and clean water. And so greening is now part of the city's culture. It's part of our global image and brand. And that's the legacy of Mayor Daley. But he also recognizes that you've got to engage the next generation. How do you sustain this over time? So there's been a major focus on greening of our school campuses, busting concrete and asphalt, integrating those gardens and green spaces into the curriculum. Today, there are 339 public schools, half of them that have teaching landscapes. Recently, the mayor launched a new initiative called Growing School Gardens. It has many partners. Open Lands, we're honored to be one of them. But to have a teaching landscape at every school in the city. I guess we, as part of the conservation and environmental community, have a great deal of appreciation for the mayor's leadership. We're proud to have been partner with him in so many ways, but we know that the work is ahead. He's shown us the way. He's developed a new ethos, a new standard. Many people have bought into it, but we've got to make sure that we recommit. And so I think that's the legacy, that's the challenge, that there's a group of people, not just places, who are connected in powerful ways to green space, nature, to sustainability in our city, and that's the great legacy of Mayor Daley. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. So I think I'm safe in saying that Mayor Daley has served Chicago's artistic and cultural community with his visionary leadership very, very well. Since 1989, the people of this city have enjoyed the benefits of an enlightened dialogue when it came to the cultural design of the city. New ideas were tested and criticized, lots of criticism, especially when it came to Chicago's public spaces. But the wonder of Mayor Daley's time in office is that he has what very few people have, and that's the capacity to see what is not there. He has the capacity to dream and to envision and to make things happen. Now, Millennium Park is the perfect example of how this man can dream. And now, quite frankly, the criticism was brutal before it was built. But now we wonder, all of us, how could we ever have been without this gorgeous and extraordinary public gathering space, which really, I think, metaphorically, has become a part of all of our families. The mayor dreamt of a city covered in green, be it on rooftops or the middle of the city streets. His efforts to green our city created really magnificent platforms for public concerts and festivals. Our parks gather all kinds of people for shared free cultural celebrations such as Chicago Blues Fest or Gospel Fest, to name just a few. And under his leadership, Chicago is able to attract that very popular Lollapalooza. Neighborhoods throughout the city host art fairs and music festivals and cultural parades, which enhance civic pride and bring so many different cultures together, quite happily. How's this for one of his most thrilling achievements? He will have built or renovated 59 libraries during his 22 years. Those buildings serve as libraries and community centers. Is there anything more important than having the repositories for education that house the soul of man for all those who choose to come and learn? I think that's an extraordinary number of libraries. The creation of U-Media at the Harold Washington Library creates a national model for engaging students in reading and making digital games and films. What it's really doing is something a little bit subversive, because it's teaching students how to create and how to be original thinkers. It's just the kind of wonderfully dangerous and thrilling activity for our students. A project very close to Maggie Daly's heart is After School Matters, which has partnered with libraries and schools and community organizations to create a network of out-of-school opportunities and artistic apprenticeships for teens in underserved communities. Our many museums are spread throughout the city. Our public art, of course, has, well, sort of defined the city. Cows on Parade, otherwise known as Moosterpieces, to the new modern wing of the Art Institute, to our Bean, our Cloud Gate, and to the wonderful statue of Harry Carey that proudly stands at Wrigley Field, home of the 2011 World Champion Cubs. You're laughing? All right, I don't get it. The mayor has also encouraged the film industry to make Chicago its home. More than 900 films have been made here in the 2 decades of his term, thereby putting our city on display for the world to admire and creating an awful lot of work for Chicagoans. When thinking about the cultural accomplishments of the mayor, I would really be remiss not mentioning our world-class performing arts institutions that have thrived under his 2 decades of leadership. Obviously, we have the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Lyric Opera, Chicago Opera Theater, the Joffrey Ballet, Hubbard Street Dance, and a brand new building for the Museum of Contemporary Arts. And hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of other smaller but no less spectacular music, theater, and dance companies. For we are a city of audacious artists who dare to create against all odds and for all people. While I'm very proud of these and other accomplishments of the mayor, the world of theater is obviously closest to my heart. Our neighborhood's theaters have long been known for producing some of the most innovative work in the world, including Steppenwolf, who's on its way to Broadway next fall with their production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, to Victory Gardens to the north in the city, to the Court Theater in the south. Now this is really important because you can all of you mayors, you can do so much for the arts in your company, in your cities. Because through the mayor's work in creating zoning and city codes that allowed for the proliferation of many performance venues, almost every neighborhood boasts a storefront theater. Theaters like the Hypocrites, ETA, Teatro Vista, The Gift are all rich with multi-generational artists. exploring their form of creativity. Over 250 theaters now call Chicago their home. And we have one of the most engaged theater-going audiences in the world. This is an amazing statistic. Almost 40% of residents of Chicago attend theater. We're home to a total of 115 performance venues, and we sell over 5 million tickets annually. The economic impact we have annually is over $1 billion in the city. At the heart of this activity lies the downtown theater district, a dream made possible by our mayor over a decade ago, thereby assuring that people would throng to the Loop for entertainment and restaurants every day of the week. In addition to job creation, which these days is obviously hugely important, theater brings tourists and people from all over the Chicagoland area into town. Today, Chicago is now known throughout the world for its creative and innovative arts community. The mayor's support of the theater district helped renovate many landmark theaters. He created new facilities and supported the infrastructure and the streetscaping improvements of neighborhoods. The most visible manifestations of this project are 4 downtown producing theaters that were opened under the auspices of Broadway in Chicago, the Goodman Theater, which moved from the Art Institute into their gorgeous complex in the Loop, and Looking Glass Theater, which was given a permanent and quite imaginative and inspiring home in the historic Water Tower building. And then Chicago Shakespeare became a cultural anchor of Navy Pier, where we have 2 versatile theaters that attract over, well over 250,000 people a year. Our Courtyard Theater and the small theater upstairs produce Shakespeare and other work inspired by his genius, and we also produce leading international companies from all over the world. You see a picture here from South Africa. We'll have a troupe coming in this June from the Middle East, Russia, the UK, all over. And we've introduced, and I think this is one of my happiest statistics for you, we've introduced over 1 million school students to Shakespeare. An amazing number. Here's another fact about the mayor. This is one of my favorite facts because it's something that all of us who know him will be nodding our heads about, and I know many of you know him very well. He is passionate, and I mean passionate, for the arts. He attends theaters, concerts, so many other cultural events all over the city. He is there. He is in person. He is learning it. He is questioning you. He is enjoying you. He is supporting arts and artists and neighborhoods. Just by his act of being there and supporting us, he attracts so many other people to all of our venues. He came to our old theater 20 years ago in the mid-1990s when the Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority were renovating the dilapidated Navy Pier. He wanted Chicago Shakespeare to be on Navy Pier, the new Navy Pier. In that regard, he had the vision that I didn't have. He knew that Chicago Shakespeare would become a cultural anchor. He knew, when I could only question his wisdom, that our theater would become an international destination. Part of Mayor Daley's genius is that he leaves and left Chicago, and he's traveled all over the world in search of great design, wonderful new ideas, and he brought them back, the best of them back, and he reinvigorated our city. He was able to synthesize the new and the old, and then from his very fertile imagination, he created one of the world's most appreciated cities, a city for the millennium. He made Chicago a much better place to live. He did this from a place deep within his heart, with all of his passion for his love for Chicago and its citizens. About 10 years ago, I told him when the history of the world is going to be written about this very brief moment in time, Chicago will be remembered for its cultural renaissance. We don't remember ancient Greece for its financial wizardry. We remember it for its theater, for its poetry, for its art, for within that work is contained the investigation of the human soul. Within this thing we call culture lies the conscience of mankind. And thanks to the mayor, this moment in time will be remembered. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you very much to Barbara and to Jerry and to Lee for three wonderful portraits of the city. So you've been paying careful attention, and I know that you have some really good questions after you have a chance to absorb those beautiful presentations. Does anyone want to start out? Sam, and okay. Sam, we're going to need a microphone for you. We have a microphone that is going to be delivered to you by somebody right now. Running up.
I guess this is for everybody. With the economic crisis that municipalities are facing today, and specifically, Chicago is not out of the woods as well, and it's going to be facing that over the next few years. And with the change that's taking place now in terms of leadership, how do you see the role of design being elevated to the same level as in the past 22 years and be carried forward when there are a lot of other issues for the next mayor that are going to be, high in the priority list? How do you see this legacy being continued by the next mayor?
That's a good question. I think what happens is that design then becomes something that's more than just aesthetic. That a well-designed building, a well-designed neighborhood, becomes sort of an organic thing that functions better, that delivers a service better, that's cheaper to run. So I think that what you'll see is Chicago sort of returning, as it always does, to its form follows function roots. So that if you see a building that looks good, it's not just going to be aesthetically good, it's going to function good as well, and that look is going to come from that function. And I think that you're right, the cupboard is bare in many respects, but I think the city, through its zoning, through whatever incentives it can offer up, can sort of push that better. Briefly, I think that you're going to also see older buildings, particularly downtown, begin to get retrofitted in a way that makes them function better. All of that adds to the health of the city. It keeps people in, it keeps jobs here, and it keeps people here.
And maybe just to add to that, relative to kind of the green infrastructure, if you want, I mean, clearly these are challenging times. We're facing, about a $700 million deficit, and who knows what next year holds. Mayor Daley, who's passionate about trees, as we all know, for the past 2 years has had no money in his budget, city dollars, for urban forestry. He was successful in getting some federal money in. But he has a bully pulpit. He's been passionate about it. He's been able to motivate the corporate community, the not-for-profit world. So we're on a trajectory. And so I think part of this is being creative and thinking more holistically, as Lee points out, about integrating these things into the very fabric of community life and our economic sustainability, and thinking about how to engage other people to keep going, even if we can't make as dramatic strides. The new mayor is going to have his own set of priorities, clearly, his own brand. It won't be exactly the Daley brand, but we want to make sure that there aren't winners and losers. I mean, that he embraces these elements that Mayor Daley has really championed, and that we seize every opportunity we can to move it forward.
Just a metaphor, with thanks to Arthur Miller. If you think of the arts, and that's all I can really speak about, if you think of the arts and no money for the arts, and buildings closing, and theaters and symphonies and museums closing, the metaphor would be you just have to think of it as covering a road with cement. And if you cover the arts over with cement, meaning no support and no people coming, here's what will happen. Cracks will appear in the cement, and the grass will grow through the cracks. So it's my way of saying that we will find it with our imaginations. We will find a way.
Tom.
I'd just like to ask one question. How do you take out an airport overnight and in the name of design? I mean, it's an interesting question. I guess one of you could answer that. I mean, I remember when this happened, we woke up one morning and said, he's just taking out an airport. And, you know, this is a great thing, an example of what mayors might do when things are in the way, when they come to our design institutes. I mean, was the arts department notified, or how did that work?
I'm going to relay this question, but I would say you need some heavy equipment and you have to go really fast.
That's right.
But go ahead.
No. Yeah, you need heavy equipment, the cover of night, and a very quick hand, I think, to get it done. But,
no, go ahead, please.
But you know, let me go back in time a bit, because this was during my time in the mayor's office, although I wasn't involved.
Right.
Yeah. But you know, there's a sense when history looks back on that it was just a grab in the middle of the night, that the X's appear on the runway and the thing was just snatched away. When in reality, I mean, this was a thing that had been debated. You know, when did I became architecture critic in '96 at the Sun-Times. Some 5 years earlier, 6 years earlier. I think the first story I wrote was about the idea of greening over Meigs Field. You know, certainly the mayor was able to seize a moment in time when he was able to do this, but this debate over what it should be, as Jerry said, you know, it went on for decades. It went on for decades before. So it takes two things. Obviously, it takes the ability to articulate a vision about what the green space should look like. That's the good part about being mayor. That's the statesman part. But then it also takes the fine hand to be able to know when the moment is that you can grab, that you can seize it. So it's a mixture of two things. And I tell you, when I was in the mayor's office, we all had to take phone calls from people complaining about it. And I thought, oh, gee whiz. And I was shocked that the majority of the people that I received, at least, phone calls from, they liked it. They liked the idea. And we got calls even from people from out of state who liked it, liked the idea. So that's a long answer to your very short question.
And just an historical footnote here to put it in perspective. That island was the first in a series of islands envisioned by the Burnham Plan. It was built based on a public referendum by the Park District. We entered the Depression, there were all sorts of things, and ultimately became an airport. It was leased then to the Department of Aviation. That lease expired. And this was parkland, and it was meant to be. And so again, there's a long story. I won't go into all the details, but there was a lot of process there. And then it took guts. Yeah. He got a lot of criticism, no question, but he made it happen.
Two other words that were used by our presenters were subversion and not related to this at all, but audacity as well. So those two things seem to be pretty important. Great question. Yes?
Can I have a question?
Okay, good.
Yes, in the context of the last remarks, or last question, in my mind I have always think of Mayor Daley as the most important Latin American mayor in the United States. And in a sense, I'm thinking that as a Guatemalan immigrant, I never imagined that I was going to miss the weight or the presence of a benevolent, enlightened dictator. And I think that it is about telling the story, in fact, of what I would call a common sense type of urbanism, where somebody believes in a mission and a vision and really prowls, cutting the red tape and cutting the stupidity of certain aspects of bureaucracy to make things happen, to accomplish them. So I know that the accomplishments have been many in this city, and today I know that it's a brief series of presentations, but what I'm interested as a designer is how these things happen. Is there a document that really maps critically the processes of negotiation that allow somebody like Mayor Daley to make these things happen? This is what needs to be translated. I like pretty images, and all of us are really proud of Chicago, but I want to learn really about the process.
Oh, yeah.
You were in mayor's office.
Yeah, I get the question, right? At UIC, that's a great question, by the way. For UIC, for about 3 years after leaving the mayor's office, I taught a class to architecture students on architecture and politics. And essentially, the gist of the class was, you know, all the stuff you've learned is almost meaningless unless you know the levers the pull in order to make some of these things happen, and the people and know the people who do know those levers. To answer the question directly, I don't think there really is a document that sort of spells this out. But I think that you can kind of draw certain conclusions from it, from what you see, which is that it's a balance of knowing your audience, if you're a mayor, knowing what the public wants, of being a visionary, to be able to articulate a vision and to move people toward it. And then there's some muscle, which I think your question kind of hinted at with Meigs Field, the airport, that at some point, as Jerry said, it takes guts, to use a more delicate word, to sort of make these things happen. And the person, and to do that, it's more of an art than a science. Some people can probably do this and come off as bullies. But it takes the fine hand to be able to do it in just the way to get the ball rolling. I mean, keep in mind that there are 50 city council members as well. So in the city council, and somehow those wishes have to be dealt with in some way or another. And Alderman X might want Y in order for the mayor to do A. But knowing what that is part of that delicate art of being a politician. And I'm telling you, there are few people in America, and maybe I would say few people in the world who aren't backed by an army that can do it as well as this mayor can.
And just to kind of add to that, I mean, in Chicago, we have aldermanic privilege that largely rules, and so it is kind of Tower of Babel. But the mayor has provided this extraordinary leadership, strong hand, whatever. But the other side of it is that there have been really good plans developed. There's been a lot of process, far more so than under previous administrations, from a central area plan to a Chicago River plan to neighborhood plans to open space plans to this plan to that plan. In the end, I think the mayor isn't too keen on plans, but he recognized it was important and that we had to have a blueprint, you had to have buy-in, and he wants to see action. And so sometimes he kind of throws the plans away maybe, but in general, that has been, kind of the blueprint that we followed. And then he was able to, through sheer will often, make things happen to implement them.
And trust. If the people don't trust you, they can't lead them, and vice versa. So that's the other, I guess, hidden part of the whole question.
Lee, I have a question for you. I don't know if you can go back to your second or your last slide that was in your presentation, but when you had that Centennial Park up, don't put me up there. That's the that Centennial Park picture that you had. We as mayors that are very interested in water and on the Great Lakes, we're interested because the 80s picture or whatever it was that you had on there, it almost looked like it was land in that slide, but I think it was actually pollution or runoff that was coming off in that slide. And I guess I wanted to point out and get your advice on the importance of utilizing the assets that we have in the Great Lakes and the rivers and the environmental quality of those and how they relate to your development and the importance of that.
That's a good question, they can't quite get the picture back up fast enough, I guess. But I think what you saw in Millennium Park was that you saw on the lakeside, you may have seen, and again, that picture may have been taken when it was ice on the lake, so I can't quite figure out what might be there. Jerry might be a better person to ask about the but I will say that, to your question about the lake, I mean, the quality of it, am I right, has increased?
Well, there are huge challenges, though, and we take out more water than any other city per capita, et cetera, et cetera. We have a huge responsibility here. And there are still pollution issues, and in heavy rains and so forth, discharge goes into the lake still, et cetera. We have made huge progress. The water quality in the Chicago River has improved dramatically. We have a long way to go, quite frankly. We don't disinfect our effluent. This is a huge issue right now. It's not part of the city. It's the Water Reclamation District, a separate unit of government. It's in the courts right now. So there are certainly still serious issues, but we have come light years under the Daley administration in valuing water quality, the lake and the river, and making huge strides in terms of improving both.
And it becomes a sustainability question that kind of gets back at Sam's question as well, is that when that ecosystem of the lake, when it functions better, when it functions the way it should, it becomes, am I right, becomes cheaper to maintain in the long run, and it does better things for the city. So it's a thing that the next mayor or the mayor-elect is going to have to get his hands around, not just for good government, let's all have clean drinking water purposes, which is good in and of itself, but because it's a thing that functions better is better.
Yes.
This is Tian Fin, district architect from San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District. My question relates to the session that will follow after this transportation and design. Lee had very eloquently illustrated some of the downtown central area revitalization, and Jerry has interesting historical view of open space and wildlife restoration, and certainly Barbara's work or review of cultural event is very powerful. I want to put this in the context of how citizens that is able to use these amenities that with a great joy and safe and efficient and also environmental friendly. So put this in context, how the Chicago's public transit has contributed to the success of these development, and what is the experience if we have not done enough, and what is the lessons learned, and perhaps our afternoon session can pick up from that point.
Well, you know, this is a critical question. I mean, the public transit system that Daley inherited in '89, it's far better now, because I wrote it in '89 and I write it now. It's far better now than before. But I think that's one of those things that the city needs loads of improvement on. We have a funny system here where you know, one transit system runs the buses and trains in the city, and then there's Metro that runs the sort of regional trains that run out of the city, and you know, you need one fare card to get on the other one, and the other guy, you know, and another fare card to get on the other, and you can't use them both. So I think, and again, it gets back to this sort of sustainable organism of a city to make it run better, that this becomes the next frontier to sort of fix, to be able to move people around. I mean, what is gas now? My car takes premium. It's like $4.60 a gallon, and here in Chicago, and that's a tax. I mean, in a, you know, yeah, I mean, that's a burden on families. So, you know, so that becomes the next thing for this next mayor, I believe, to really begin, and current governor, to get his hands around, to improve the transit system within the city, but also within the region, so we can get back and forth. Without that, the city, you know, it loses its luster a bit. But I'm believing that the new mayor, the mayor-elect Rahm Emanuel, fully understands that. Part of his campaign stops were on L platforms, so he has to get a sense of that and can hopefully change it. But it's a must. It's a must-do.
And thinking of public spaces, parks, and green spaces in the city, community-based, you know, gathering commons, if you want, I think one of the key ingredients in the past, the recent past, has been engaging the community in those discussions. In the past, you know, a new park would appear or the greening of a school campus and nobody was involved. It was a central decision. And even though it may have been beautiful, the community had no voice in that. And so it wasn't sustained. Oftentimes it was resented. And so there has been increasingly tremendous engagement of quote, stakeholders, you know, going back to the 60s and 70s here, but that community-based planning process. And I think that addresses issues like safety and accessibility, and making sure that the community understands and is helping to shape it so that they in turn will love it and maintain it. Safety is a huge issue everywhere, but I think that we've made great strides in terms of the process here.
We have time for one more. Okay, two more. Sure. Okay, two more questions. There, and you're first and you're second, and then that's it.
Hello. Yes, I had a question for Lee or anyone else who wants to answer this. It's an old question, but relates to all those people who lived in the Robert Taylor homes. And I was just wondering if you knew where they are today. Have you tracked that? What's happened?
You know, I personally have not. I think the CHA, the Chicago Housing Authority, I want to say this week has, or some entity that's working with them has released a bit of a study that kind of shows that I think that most of the people who were left public housing are able to find housing within the city. They give them vouchers and other things. The sense was that you know, the conventional wisdom was that, you know, that once you get a voucher, that you're sort of off to someplace else, and, you know, far-flung suburb, and a lot of that has happened. But it was heartening to know that many of the people are still within the boundaries of the city, which is good. But again, that doesn't answer the whole question. It's almost, those figures are almost like unemployment figures, that they track the ones that are still looking for jobs. some people have fallen off the grid. They were called least uncompliant. I think that's the term they used when public housing was there, and therefore they're just sort of out. And I don't think there's been a mechanism to track where those people are. So there's a lost population out there.
Our last question. Thank you.
I want to talk about term limits. Obviously, Mayor Daley ended up being a benevolent dictator of sorts. But 22 years is a pretty significant and somewhat unprecedented amount of time to be in office. So obviously I don't necessarily favor the type of term limits that we have right now, certainly in our city, but I'd just like to know what your thoughts are about.
We have it. We have term limits, which is that if you, as a former mayor of this city who's no longer with us, could tell you if you don't deliver a city service when it's critical, like a snowstorm in 1979, the people will vote you out of office. And that's the,
Good.
I was just telling John, I'm 45 years old, and there's been a Daley as mayor for about 37 of my 45 years, either the old man or the current one. But the fact of the matter is that you get to hold that seat because you deliver. If you don't deliver, you don't hold the seat. That's our term limit.
Okay. Anyway.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap up. I want to give a big thank you to Lee, to Jerry, and to Barbara. All of you. I also want to thank you for asking really good questions and making this a dynamic discussion. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jason to give you instructions.